28 years of my life were built on a lie so perfect, so carefully crafted, that when it finally crumbled, it took everything I thought I knew about myself with it. I'm Sarah, and if you're listening to this story right now, wherever you are in the world, whether you're in New York, Los Angeles, a small town in Ohio, or even halfway across the globe, I need you to understand something. This isn't just my story. This is about the people who are supposed to love us most, and what happens when that love becomes a weapon. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because I have a feeling this story is going to hit close to home for so many of you. The morning of my 28th birthday started like any other disappointing milestone in my adult life. I woke up in my cramped studio apartment in Chicago, the same apartment where the heater barely worked, where I had to jiggle the bathroom door handle just right or risk getting locked inside, where the neighbors upstairs sounded like they were training for the Olympics in their living room at 3 in the morning. I'd been living there for 6 years, ever since college, scraping together rent for my job at a local marketing firm where I made barely enough to cover my student loans, let alone save for anything better. My parents, Linda and Robert Chin, had always been supportive in their own way, but they'd made it clear from the beginning that I needed to make my own path in the world. Character is built through struggle, my dad would always say, usually while adjusting his reading glasses and looking at me with that mixture of pride and disappointment that somehow said both, "We believe in you," and "We expected more." But here's what I didn't know as I brushed my teeth that morning, staring at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. My grandfather, my mother's father, William Harrison, wasn't just the comfortable retiree I'd always been told he was. William Harrison was worth $2.3 billion. And I was about to find out that everything, absolutely everything, I'd believed about my family, my struggles, my entire identity as someone who had to fight for every small victory in life, was a carefully orchestrated deception that had been playing out for nearly 3 decades. If you've ever felt like your family was keeping secrets from you, if you've ever wondered why your life seemed harder than it should be, or if you've ever discovered that the people closest to you weren't who you thought they were, please hit that subscribe button right now. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you look at family loyalty forever. The day started with a phone call from my mom. She had that slightly forced cheerfulness in her voice that she always got when she was trying too hard to sound casual. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Your father and I were wondering if you'd like to come to dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just the 3 of us. Oh, and your grandfather might stop by." I should explain something about my grandfather. William Harrison was this quiet, gentle man who I saw maybe 3 or 4 times a year, usually at holidays. He was 76 years old, with silver hair that was always perfectly combed and these kind, twinkling blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He dressed simply, cardigans, slacks, sensible shoes, and he had this way of asking about your life that made you feel like he genuinely cared about every small detail. What I knew about Grandpa William was limited, and, as I would soon discover, completely fabricated. My parents had told me he was a retired insurance adjuster who lived modestly in a small house across town. He drove an older model Honda Civic, wore a simple watch, and never seemed to have much money to spend on gifts. For birthdays and Christmas, he'd give me thoughtful but inexpensive presents, a book he thought I'd enjoy, a handmade scarf, maybe $50 tucked into a card with a note about being proud of the woman I was becoming. I loved him. He was steady and kind in a way that felt rare in the world. But I also felt a little sorry for him, thinking he was probably living on a fixed income, maybe struggling a bit financially like so many seniors I knew. "That sounds nice, Mom," I said, cradling my phone between my shoulder and ear while I poured coffee into a mug that had a chip on the handle. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself, honey. Oh, and Sarah? Wear something nice. You know how your grandfather appreciates when we make an effort." Something in her tone made me pause. There was an undercurrent of nervousness that I couldn't quite place, like she was preparing for something more significant than a casual family dinner. "Mom, is everything okay? You sound, I don't know, tense." "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just excited to celebrate with you. We'll see you at 6. After I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this birthday. Maybe it was turning 28, not quite 30, but close enough to feel the weight of all the things I hadn't accomplished yet. Maybe it was the way my mother's voice had that slight tremor when she mentioned my grandfather. Or maybe it was the fact that 3 days earlier, I'd received a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, asking me to confirm my current address and phone number for estate planning purposes. When I'd called to ask what it was about, the receptionist had simply said there must have been a mistake and that they'd remove me from their mailing list. I spent the day at work trying to focus on a client presentation, but my mind kept wandering. By 5:30, I was standing in front of my closet, trying to figure out what something nice meant for a casual dinner with my parents and grandfather. I settled on a navy blue dress that I'd bought for job interviews, professional but not overly formal, and added the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me before she died, when I was 12. The drive to my parents' house in the suburbs took 45 minutes, and with every mile, that strange feeling in my stomach grew stronger. It was like being a kid again, walking into the principal's office and knowing you were in trouble, but not knowing why. My parents lived in a modest 2-story house in a middle-class neighborhood, the same house where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I'd had countless sleepovers and birthday parties. It was comfortable but not extravagant, and it perfectly matched the story I'd always been told about our family's middle class: work hard for what you have values. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed my grandfather's Honda Civic parked on the street. But there was something different about it that I'd never noticed before. The car looked too perfect, like it had been detailed recently, or like it wasn't actually driven very often. The thought flitted through my mind and disappeared just as quickly. My mother answered the door before I could even knock, and immediately I knew something was wrong. She looked beautiful, more dressed up than usual for family dinner, but her smile was tight around the edges, and she kept smoothing down her skirt in a nervous gesture I remembered from my childhood whenever she was anxious about something. "Sarah, happy birthday, sweetheart." She hugged me a little too tightly and held on a little too long. "Thanks, Mom. Where's Dad?" "In the kitchen with your grandfather. They're talking." The way she said talking made it sound more like negotiating or confessing. My stomach dropped another notch. As I walked through the living room toward the kitchen, I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The furniture was nice, really nice. Not expensive exactly, but well-made, coordinated. The art on the walls wasn't just random prints. It looked like original pieces. There were small details everywhere that suddenly seemed inconsistent with the "we're comfortable but not wealthy" narrative I'd grown up with. In the kitchen, my father was standing by the island, his hands clasped behind his back in that formal way he adopted when he was nervous. My grandfather sat at the kitchen table, but instead of his usual relaxed posture, he was sitting straight up, his hands folded in front of him, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't his usual warm, grandfatherly smile. It was the look of someone who was about to deliver news that would change everything. "Happy birthday, Sarah," my grandfather said, his voice carrying a weight that made the simple greeting sound like the beginning of something much more significant. "Thanks, Grandpa." I moved to give him his usual hug, but he held up a gentle hand. "Before we celebrate, sweetheart, I think we need to have a conversation. All of us." My father cleared his throat. "Sarah, honey, why don't you sit down?" That's when I knew. I didn't know what I knew, but I knew that my life was about to split into a before and after, and this moment, standing in my parents' kitchen on my 28th birthday, with my grandfather looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time, was the fulcrum point. I sat down across from my grandfather, my hands folded in my lap, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape what was coming. "Sarah," my grandfather began, his voice gentle but firm, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Are you happy with your living situation? Your apartment, your life in the city?" The question was so unexpected, so seemingly innocent, that I almost laughed. "I mean, it's fine. It's what I can afford right now." "Why?" My grandfather's eyes never left mine. Behind him, I could see my parents exchanging a look that I couldn't quite read, part panic, part resignation. "What I'm about to tell you," my grandfather continued, "is going to be difficult to hear. And it's going to change everything." If someone had told me that afternoon that I was about to discover my entire life had been built on a lie, I would have laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative, believing it, would have been too devastating to contemplate. Sarah, my grandfather said, leaning forward slightly, I want you to know that everything I'm about to tell you comes from a place of love. But I also need you to understand that there are things about our family, about me, that your parents felt were complicated. My mother made a small sound from where she stood by the sink, something between a sigh and a whimper. My father moved closer to her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. What kind of things? I asked, though part of me was screaming to get up, walk out, pretend this conversation wasn't happening. My grandfather reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was old, maybe from the 1990s, and it showed him standing in front of a massive building with his name carved into the stone facade. Harrison Financial Group. Sweetheart, I'm not a retired insurance adjuster. The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at the photograph, then at my grandfather's face, then back at the photograph, as if looking at it long enough would make it make sense. I don't understand. Harrison Financial Group is one of the largest investment firms on the East Coast. We manage portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in America, and we've been doing it for 47 years. I founded the company when your mother was just a little girl. I looked at my mother, who was now staring at the floor as if she could disappear into it. But you drive a Honda Civic. You live in that little house on Maple Street. You gave me $50 for my birthday last year. My grandfather's smile was sad and proud at the same time. The Honda Civic belongs to my assistant. The house on Maple Street is a property I keep for situations like this. And the $50. He paused, looking at my parents again. The $50 was what your parents told me was an appropriate amount for a grandfather in my supposed financial situation to give. The room started to spin slightly. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. I don't understand. Why would you pretend to be something you're not? Because, my mother said, finally speaking, her voice barely above a whisper, we thought it would be better for you. We thought if you knew about the money, it would change you, make you entitled. We wanted you to learn the value of hard work, to build character, to struggle. I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. You wanted me to struggle? While you what? While you had access to wealth that could have made my life completely different. The pieces were starting to come together, and each new realization hit like a physical blow. The apartment with the broken heater that I'd been too proud to complain about. The student loans that had kept me awake at night, calculating and recalculating how long it would take to pay them off. The job I'd taken not because I loved it, but because I desperately needed the income. The times I'd skipped meals to save money, the social events I'd missed because I couldn't afford them, the constant, grinding anxiety of never having enough. Sarah, honey, my father said, stepping forward, we never wanted you to suffer. We just thought. You thought what? That poverty builds character? That watching me stress about rent every month was somehow good for my soul? My grandfather held up a hand. Sarah, before you blame your parents entirely, I need you to understand that this was my decision too. When you were born, I was so excited to have a granddaughter. I had big plans, trust funds, private schools, a future where you'd never have to worry about anything. He paused, looking at his hands. But I'd watched too many wealthy families destroy their children with money. I'd seen teenagers who couldn't function without their parents' credit cards, young adults who had never worked a day in their lives but felt entitled to everything. Your parents and I, we agreed that you would grow up differently. You would earn your place in the world. But at what cost? I asked, and I could hear my voice breaking. Do you have any idea what the last 6 years have been like for me? Do you know that I've been taking anxiety medication because I was so stressed about money that I couldn't sleep? That I haven't been to a dentist in 2 years because I couldn't afford it? That I've missed weddings and family gatherings because I couldn't afford the travel? The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, my own heart beating in my ears. My grandfather reached across the table and took my hand. His skin was soft and warm, the same hands that had taught me to play chess when I was 8, that had bandaged my scraped knees, that had held me when my grandmother died. Sarah, I need to tell you something else. I almost couldn't bear to hear it. How much worse could this get? When you turned 18, I established a trust fund for you. It's been accumulating interest for 10 years now. My mother made that sound again, louder this time. How much? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. With interest and investments, it's currently worth approximately $1.2 million. The number hit me like a physical force. I actually felt my breath leave my lungs, as if someone had punched me in the stomach. $1.2 million. While I had been rationing groceries and wearing the same 3 work outfits in rotation, there was $1.2 million sitting in an account with my name on it. But that's not all, my grandfather continued, and I honestly didn't think I could handle anything more. For the past 10 years, I've also been purchasing properties. I wanted to make sure that when you were ready, when you had learned the value of work and sacrifice, you would have not just money, but real assets. He pulled out another folder, this one thick with documents. There's a 3-bedroom house in Lincoln Park, a condo in downtown Chicago, a cabin in Wisconsin, and a small office building that generates rental income. I stared at the folder without taking it. You bought me houses? I bought you a future, sweetheart. A future without the financial stress that has clearly taken such a toll on you. And that's when the anger hit. It started as a slow burn in my chest and then exploded outward until I felt like I was burning alive with it. This man, this kind, gentle grandfather who I'd loved and respected my entire life, had watched me struggle for a decade while sitting on enough money to buy a small country. You watched me cry, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Do you remember 3 years ago, when I got that promotion I was so excited about? I called you to tell you the good news, and I started crying because it meant I could finally afford to get my car fixed. My grandfather nodded, his eyes filling with tears. You listened to me sob with gratitude over a $4,000 raise while you had over $1 million sitting in an account for me. You comforted me when I told you I was scared I'd never be able to afford to have children because I could barely support myself. I stood up so abruptly that my chair almost tipped over. And you, I said, turning to my parents, you watched me work 2 jobs during college. You watched me apply for grants and scholarships and work-study programs, filling out forms that asked about our family's financial situation, and you lied. You lied on every single one. My mother was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah, we thought we were doing the right thing. We thought. You thought wrong. I grabbed my purse from the counter, my hands shaking with fury and shock and a heartbreak so complete I didn't know if I'd ever recover from it. Sarah, please don't leave, my grandfather said, standing up. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to move forward. Move forward. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to move forward? Here's how we move forward. You give me access to what's mine, what should have been mine 10 years ago. And then you stay away from me until I figure out how to forgive you for this. Sweetheart. Don't call me sweetheart. Don't call me anything. I need time to process the fact that the 3 people I trusted most in the world have been lying to me for my entire adult life. I was at the front door when my grandfather called out one more thing. Sarah, there's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. I turned around, and the look on his face made my blood run cold. What? The properties I bought for you. I've been having them maintained, decorated, kept ready for you to move into whenever you were ready. There's a house, the one in Lincoln Park. It's been yours for 3 years. I've been paying the mortgage, the utilities, having it cleaned and maintained, waiting for the day when you were ready to know the truth. The world tilted sideways. You mean while I've been living in that apartment, dealing with broken heating and thin walls and a bathroom door that doesn't lock, I've had a house? A whole house. He nodded. That was the moment something fundamental broke inside me. Not just my trust in my family, but my understanding of reality itself. For 3 years, while I had been struggling to make rent on an apartment that was slowly driving me insane, I had owned a house in one of Chicago's most desirable neighborhoods. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. But as I sat in my car in their driveway, Gripping the steering wheel and trying to process what had just happened, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. This was about three adults deciding that they knew better than I did how my life should go, and manipulating every aspect of my reality to make their vision come true. And as I drove back to my cramped, overpriced apartment for what I had decided would be the very last time, I began to formulate a plan. Not just for getting what was rightfully mine, but for making sure they understood exactly what their deception had cost me. I was done being the grateful, struggling granddaughter. It was time for them to learn what happens when you steal someone's life and call it love. You know that feeling when you discover that everything you thought was true about your life was actually a carefully constructed lie? It's not just anger, though God knows there was plenty of that. It's a complete disconnection from reality, like you've been living in a movie and someone just told you it was all fake. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, but because every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandfather's face when he told me about the house. The house that had been sitting empty, waiting for me, while I complained to anyone who would listen about my upstairs neighbors and their apparent midnight dance rehearsals. I sat on my lumpy couch, the same couch I'd bought used from a college student who was moving back in with her parents, and tried to make sense of what I'd learned. But the more I thought about it, the more questions arose, and the angrier I became. If you've ever had someone you trusted completely betray you, you know that the anger doesn't stay pure. It gets mixed with hurt and confusion and this terrible, hollow feeling where your trust used to be. But here's the thing about betrayal. It also makes you wonder what else you don't know. And that's when things get really dangerous. I called in sick to work the next morning. I told my boss I had a family emergency, which was technically true, though emergency didn't quite cover the magnitude of what was happening. Then I did what any reasonable person would do when they discover their entire life has been orchestrated by other people. I started investigating my own family. It's amazing what you can find online when you're motivated. A simple search for Harrison Financial Group revealed a website for a company that managed over $4 billion in assets. $4 billion. With a B. The About Us section featured a professional headshot of my grandfather. Not the gentle, cardigan-wearing man I knew, but a sharp-suited executive with a kind of confident smile that said he was used to being the most important person in any room. According to his biography, William Harrison had founded the company in 1976 and had been recognized multiple times as one of Chicago's most influential business leaders. There were photos of him at charity galas, sitting on hospital boards, cutting ribbons at museum openings. In every single photo, he looked exactly like what he was, a man worth billions of dollars. But here's what really got to me. In several of the photos, my parents were with him. My mother, wearing gowns that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. My father, comfortable and familiar in what was clearly his element. These weren't people attending events as guests. They were people who belonged in those rooms. I found real estate records next. The house in Lincoln Park that had supposedly been purchased for me 3 years ago, it was worth $2.8 million. Not just nice, mansion-level nice. 6 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and a backyard that looked like something out of a magazine. And here's the part that made my hands shake as I scrolled through the photos. It was fully furnished. Not just furnished, decorated. Like someone had hired a professional designer to create a home specifically for me. There were paintings on the walls, books on the shelves, even clothes hanging in the closets. Women's clothes. In my size. Someone had been preparing for my life to change, and they'd been doing it for years. I spent the entire day going through public records, news articles, and social media posts, piecing together a picture of my family that was so different from what I'd grown up believing that I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. But the most shocking discovery came when I found an article from the Chicago Tribune from 5 years earlier. The headline read, "Local Billionaire's Granddaughter Chooses Independence Over Inheritance." The article was about me. Sarah Chun, 23, granddaughter of financial mogul William Harrison, has chosen to forge her own path rather than accept her family's considerable wealth. "We're incredibly proud of Sarah's decision to build her own life," Harrison told reporters at a recent charity event. She's working hard, supporting herself, and proving that the Harrison work ethic runs in the family. I read the article 3 times before it sank in. My grandfather had been using my financial struggles as a public relations story. To the outside world, I wasn't a granddaughter who had been kept in the dark about her family's wealth. I was a principled young woman who had nobly chosen poverty over privilege. And then I found the photos. Social media is a dangerous thing when you're trying to reconstruct your own life. I found my mother's Facebook account, which she had kept mostly private, but her profile picture was recent, her and my father at what looked like a very expensive restaurant, both of them wearing clothes that would have cost me several months' salary. But it was her photo albums that really broke something inside me. Years and years of photos that I had never seen. My parents at charity events, on vacations to places I couldn't even identify, at parties in homes that looked like palaces. They weren't living the modest, middle-class life they had always presented to me. They were living like the wealthy people they actually were. There were even photos of my house, the one in Lincoln Park. Pictures of my mother arranging flowers in what appeared to be my kitchen. My father reading a book in what looked like my living room. They had been using the house that was supposedly sitting empty, waiting for me. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money or even control. This was about them creating 2 separate versions of reality. The one where I struggled and grew character through hardship, and the one where they lived comfortably off the family wealth, while publicly taking credit for raising such an admirably independent daughter. But the absolute worst discovery came in the comments on one of my mother's posts from 6 months ago. It was a photo of a beautiful bedroom with huge windows and gorgeous furniture, and she had captioned it, "Getting Sarah's room ready for when she's finally ready to join the family business." One of her friends had commented, "I thought Sarah wanted to make it on her own?" My mother's response made my blood boil. "She thinks she does, but we know she'll come around eventually. This is just a phase. Young people need to feel independent for a while, but family money always wins in the end." A phase. 28 years of my life, 6 years of genuine financial stress and anxiety, and she thought it was a phase. I closed my laptop and sat in the silence of my apartment, listening to my upstairs neighbors and their evening gymnastics routine, looking around at my discount furniture and secondhand decorations, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not just anger, rage. Pure, clean, focused rage. They had stolen my 20s from me. While I had been working multiple jobs and eating ramen for dinner and lying awake at night worrying about how I was going to afford rent, they had been living in luxury and telling people what a wonderful job they'd done raising such an independent daughter. But as I sat there in my fury, something else started to crystallize. A plan. Not just to get what was mine, but to make sure they understood exactly what their deception had cost. Not just me, but them. Because here's the thing about lies that big. They don't just hurt the person being lied to. They create a weakness, a vulnerability that can be exploited. And my family had just revealed the biggest vulnerability of all. They cared desperately about their public image. I picked up my phone and called the number my grandfather had given me for his lawyer. "Sterling, Mitchell and Associates. This is Rebecca." "Hi, this is Sarah Chun. I believe you have some documents for me." There was a pause. "Miss Chun." "Yes. We've been expecting your call. When would you like to come in to review your trust fund documentation?" "How about tomorrow morning?" "And Rebecca, I want to see everything. Every property, every account, every investment. I want a complete picture of exactly what my grandfather has been doing with my money for the past 10 years. "Of course. Would 10 o'clock work for you?" "Perfect. And Rebecca, one more thing. I want to understand the legal implications if someone has been using properties that were purchased in a trust for me. For their own purposes, I mean." Another pause, longer this time. I think that would be a question for Mr. Sterling to address directly."
"Good.
I'll see you tomorrow." After I hung up, I realized I was smiling for the first time since my birthday dinner. Not a happy smile, something sharper, more dangerous. If my family wanted to play games with my life, if they wanted to manipulate my reality and use my struggles as some kind of moral victory story, then it was time for them to learn that they had underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I wasn't their grateful, struggling granddaughter anymore. I was a woman who had just discovered She was worth millions of dollars and had been systematically lied to by the people she trusted most. And I was about to remind them that revenge, like compound interest, gets more powerful the longer you wait to collect it. But first, I was going to take a long, hot bath in my broken bathtub and start planning exactly how I was going to dismantle the perfect little life they had built on the foundation of my suffering. Tomorrow, I would start getting my life back. Tonight, I was going to enjoy imagining the looks on their faces when they realized their phase was about to become their worst nightmare. Walking into Sterling, Mitchell and Associates felt like entering a different world, one where I actually belonged, though I didn't know it yet. The offices were in one of Chicago's most prestigious buildings, all marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place where serious money was discussed in hushed, respectful tones. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing my best work outfit and the pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. I wanted to look professional, but I also wanted to look like someone who deserved respect. Someone who wasn't going to be pushed around or manipulated anymore. Miss Chen. The receptionist was a well-dressed woman about my age, and she looked at me with the kind of polite interest that suggested she knew exactly who I was and why I was there. Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the conference room. David Sterling was a man in his 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes behind expensive glasses. He stood when I entered, extending his hand with a smile that seemed genuine. Sarah, it's so good to finally meet you. Your grandfather has talked about you for years. Has he? I asked, settling into a leather chair across from him. What exactly has he said? Mr. Sterling paused, clearly catching the edge in my voice. He's very proud of your independence. Your work ethic.
Right.
My independence. I leaned back in my chair. Mr. Sterling, I'm going to be direct with you. I found out about the trust fund and the properties 3 days ago. Before that, I had no idea any of this existed. So when you say my grandfather is proud of my independence, what I hear is that he's proud of lying to me for 10 years. The lawyer's expression shifted, becoming more cautious. Sarah, I understand this must be overwhelming. What I'd like to understand, I interrupted, is the legal situation here. These properties that were purchased for me, who's been using them? Mr. Sterling opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. The trust was established when you turned 18, with your grandfather as the trustee until you claimed ownership. The properties are all legally yours, but the trust documents gave him discretionary power over their management until you were ready to take control. And management includes letting my parents use them? He was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, what exactly do you know about your parents' living situation? I thought they lived in their house in the suburbs, the same house I grew up in. Mr. Sterling pulled out another set of documents. Your parents sold that house 4 years ago. They've been living in the Lincoln Park property, the one purchased for you, for the past 3 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. They what? The suburban house was sold when your father's business was struggling. Rather than ask your grandfather for help directly, the trust allowed for family use of the properties in emergency situations. Emergency situations? My voice was getting higher, more strained. My father's business was struggling, so instead of telling me, their daughter, they moved into my house and continued to let me pay rent on an apartment with a broken heater? Mr. Sterling looked deeply uncomfortable. Sarah, I think there are aspects of this situation that you may not fully understand. Then explain them to me. All of them. I want to see every document, every transaction, every decision that's been made with my money and my property, without my knowledge. For the next 2 hours, David Sterling laid out the complete financial picture of my life. It was so much worse than I had imagined. The trust fund wasn't just $1.2 million. With investments and compound interest, it was worth $3.7 million. The properties weren't just the house and condo I'd been told about. There were 7 properties in total, worth a combined $8.2 million. The rental income from the commercial properties alone was generating enough money every month to cover my entire year's salary. But here's where it gets really twisted. My parents hadn't just been living in the Lincoln Park house. They had been collecting rental income from the other properties and using it to fund their lifestyle. The expensive restaurants, the designer clothes, the charity events. All of it paid for with money that should have been mine. How is this legal? I asked, staring at the bank statements that showed monthly deposits of $15,000 to $20,000 into an account managed by my parents. Technically, it's not, Mr. Sterling admitted. The trust documents allow for emergency use of the properties, but they require full disclosure to the beneficiary and repayment of any financial benefits. Your parents were supposed to be paying rent for the Lincoln Park house, and the rental income should have been going back into the trust. How much money are we talking about? He pulled out a calculator and started typing. Over the past 3 years, approximately $1.8 million in rental income and property appreciation that should have been added to your trust. I felt the room spin slightly. So, they didn't just lie to me about the money.
They stole from me.
That's a very strong word, Sarah. Is it? What would you call taking money that legally belongs to someone else and using it to fund your own lifestyle while that person struggles to pay rent? Mr. Sterling was quiet for a long moment. I would call it a serious breach of fiduciary duty. And what would be the legal consequences of that breach? Well, they would be required to pay back everything they took, plus interest. And, depending on how the situation was handled, there could be criminal charges. Criminal charges. The words hung in the air like a promise. Mr. Sterling, I want full control of my trust transferred to me immediately. And I want a complete accounting of every dollar that's been taken out of it without my knowledge. Sarah, are you sure you want to? I'm sure. And I want you to draft a letter to my parents demanding repayment of the $1.8 million they've stolen from me. Give them 30 days. Sarah, please think about this carefully. These are your parents. Your grandfather. Maybe there's a way to handle this that doesn't involve. Mr. Sterling, I said, standing up, for 10 years, I have been living paycheck to paycheck while my family has been living off my money and lying to me about it. They had every opportunity to tell me the truth, and instead they chose to steal from me and use my financial struggles as some kind of character-building exercise. So no, I don't want to handle this gently. I want to handle this legally. He nodded slowly. Very well. I'll have the papers drawn up by tomorrow.
Good.
And one more thing, I want to see the Lincoln Park house. Today. Mr. Sterling pulled out a set of keys. The property manager has been maintaining it, but your parents have been in residence. Perfect. Then they can be the first to know that their free ride is over. The drive to Lincoln Park felt like traveling through time. With every block, the neighborhood got nicer, the houses bigger, the cars more expensive. By the time I pulled up to the address Mr. Sterling had given me, I was in a part of Chicago that I had only seen in magazines. The house was beautiful. Not just nice, genuinely stunning. It was a classic Chicago brownstone that had been restored with obvious care and enormous expense. The front garden was perfectly maintained, the windows gleamed, and everything about it screamed serious money. And it was mine. Had been mine for 3 years, while I'd been living in an apartment where I had to wear socks to bed because the heating didn't work properly. I sat in my car for several minutes, just staring at the house and trying to process the magnitude of what my family had done to me. This wasn't just about money, though God knows there was plenty of that. This was about them stealing my entire adult life and rewriting it to suit their own narrative about what was best for me. But as I sat there, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the driveway was my father's car, and through the front window, I could see lights on in what appeared to be the living room. They were home, in my house, living their comfortable life funded by my money, probably never thinking that this day would come. I took a deep breath, got out of my car, and walked up to the front door of my own house. I didn't knock. The key Mr. Sterling had given me worked perfectly, and I walked into my own home for the first time. The interior was even more beautiful than the photos I'd seen online. Hardwood floors, crown molding, a sweeping staircase, and furniture that looked like it had been selected by a professional decorator. Which I realized it probably had been. With my money. I could hear voices coming from what sounded like the kitchen, my mother's laugh, my father saying something about dinner plans. They sounded relaxed, happy, completely comfortable in the home they had stolen from me. I walked through the living room, taking note of the details. Family photos on the mantelpiece, but not the cheap frames I remembered from my childhood. These were expensive silver frames, and the photos were professional portraits. There was even one of me from my college graduation, but it was displayed like a trophy rather than a cherished memory. The kitchen was gorgeous, granite countertops, high-end appliances, a breakfast nook with windows that looked out onto a garden that probably cost more to maintain than I'd been spending on food each month. My parents were sitting at the kitchen island, sharing a bottle of wine that I could tell from the label was expensive. They looked up when I walked in, and I will never forget the expression on their faces. First confusion. Who is this person walking into their kitchen? Then recognition. Oh, it's Sarah. Then absolute, stark terror as they realized what my presence in this house meant. Sarah, my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. How did I get into my own house? I asked, setting my keys down on the granite counter. Funny story. It turns out when you own a property, lawyers give you keys to it. My father started to stand up. Sweetheart, we can explain. Sit down, Dad. We're going to have a conversation, and you're both going to listen. The authority in my own voice surprised me. For the first time in my life, I was the one with the power in this family dynamic, and it felt intoxicating. I spent a day with David Sterling, learning some very interesting things about my finances, about my properties, about what my family has been doing behind my back for the past decade. My mother's wine glass was shaking in her hand. Sarah, you have to understand. What I understand, I said, pulling out one of the kitchen chairs and sitting down like I own the place, which, of course, I did, is that while I've been working my ass off to pay rent on an apartment with a broken heater, you've been living in my $2.8 million house, rent-free. It's not that simple, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. Really?
Because it seems pretty simple to me. You stole from me.
For years. While watching me struggle and telling everyone what a good job you did raising me to be independent. I pulled out my phone and opened the Facebook photos I'd found of my mother arranging flowers in this very kitchen. Explain this to me, Mom. Explain why you're posting photos of yourself in my house, while I'm living in an apartment where I can hear my neighbors' conversations through the walls. She started crying then, but I felt no sympathy for her. Those tears were for getting caught, not for what she had done to me. Sarah, we never meant for it to go this far. When your father's business was struggling, your grandfather suggested we could stay here temporarily.
3 years, Mom.
3 years is not temporary. And the rental income from my other properties? The money you've been using to fund your lifestyle? Was that temporary too? My father's face went white. How do you? I know everything. Every property, every account, every dollar you've stolen from me while I was eating ramen for dinner and worrying about whether I could afford to get my car fixed. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden that should have been mine to enjoy. Here's what's going to happen. You have 24 hours to get your things and get out of my house. David Sterling is preparing documentation that shows exactly how much money you've stolen from me over the past 3 years. $1.8 million, in case you were wondering. You have 30 days to pay it back. Sarah, please, my mother said. We don't have that kind of money. Everything we have is tied up in investments you made with money you stole from me? I turned around to face them. That sounds like a problem you should have considered before you decided to finance your entire lifestyle with your daughter's trust fund. We can work something out, my father said desperately. Some kind of payment plan. The only thing we're going to work out is how quickly you can get out of my house. Because every day you stay here after tonight is another day you're trespassing on my property. I picked up my keys and headed toward the door, but I stopped and turned back to them. Oh, and Mom?
Dad?
In case you're thinking about running to Grandpa for help with this, you should know that I'm planning to have a very interesting conversation with him tomorrow. About fiduciary duty.
About theft.
About what happens when trustees abuse their position. I left them sitting in the kitchen of my house, and as I walked to my car, I could hear my mother sobbing. But for the first time in 3 days, I wasn't the one crying. I was the one with the power. And I was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up in my cramped apartment for what I had decided would be the absolute last time. But instead of the usual dread I felt looking around at my discount furniture and listening to my upstairs neighbors practice what sounded like competitive stomping, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Today was the day I was going to confront my grandfather. Not as the grateful, struggling granddaughter who accepted his modest gifts with appreciation, but as a woman who had discovered that her entire adult life had been orchestrated by people who claimed to love her. I dressed carefully, my best business suit, the pearl earrings, shoes that made me feel confident. I looked in my cracked bathroom mirror and saw someone different than I had 3 days ago. The same face, but something had changed in my eyes. I looked like someone who knew her own worth. If you've ever been in a situation where you knew you were about to change the power dynamic in a relationship forever, you know that feeling of nervous energy, like electricity running through your veins. That's what I felt as I drove across town to my grandfather's office. Not the modest insurance building I'd imagined all these years, but the gleaming headquarters of Harrison Financial Group. The lobby was intimidating in the way that serious money always is: marble floors, original artwork, the kind of furniture that costs more than most people's cars. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 40s, looked up when I approached her desk. "I'm here to see William Harrison," I said. "Do you have an appointment, miss?"
Chun.
Sarah Chun. "And no, I don't have an appointment. But I'm his granddaughter, and I think he'll want to see me." Her entire demeanor changed. "Miss Chun. Of course. Let me call up to his office right away." As I rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, I thought about all the times my grandfather had told me about his humble work as an insurance adjuster, how he'd worried about making ends meet in retirement, how proud he was that I was making my own way in the world. Every word had been a lie, and each lie had cost me years of my life. The elevator doors opened to reveal another world entirely. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, and the offices were decorated with the kind of understated elegance that only comes with serious, generational wealth. This wasn't just successful, this was empire-level money. "Sarah?" My grandfather emerged from a corner office that was larger than my entire apartment. He looked exactly the same as always: kind eyes, gentle smile, cardigan, but now I could see it for what it was: a costume. "What a wonderful surprise. What brings you to see your old grandpa at work?" The casual way he said it, like this massive financial empire was just his little hobby, made my anger flare white-hot.
"We need to talk," I said.
"Privately." "Of course, sweetheart. Come into my office." His office was stunning: leather furniture, built-in bookshelves, a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of wood. The walls were covered with awards, photos with politicians and celebrities, certificates of achievements. This was the office of one of the most powerful men in Chicago, not a retired insurance adjuster. "Grandpa," I said, settling into one of the leather chairs across from his desk, "I had a very interesting meeting with David Sterling yesterday." The change in his expression was subtle, but unmistakable. The kindly grandfather mask slipped just slightly, replaced by something sharper, more calculating. "Did you now?" "I did. And I learned some fascinating things about my finances, about my properties, about what my family has been doing behind my back for the past decade." He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I suppose this conversation was inevitable. Was it? Because it seems to me like you all were planning to keep lying to me indefinitely." "Sarah, you have to understand."
"No."
I held up a hand. "You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to tell me about character building or the value of hard work or any of the other bullshit justifications you've been using to rationalize stealing 10 years of my life." His eyes narrowed slightly. This was a side of my grandfather I had never seen before: the businessman, the person who had built a billion-dollar empire. "Stealing is a very strong word, Sarah." "Is it? What would you call lying to someone about their financial situation for a decade while they struggle to pay bills that they could have easily afforded? What would you call letting your son-in-law and daughter live rent-free in property that belongs to someone else while that someone else lives in an apartment with a broken heater?" Your parents needed help. I needed help. Every day for 6 years I needed help, and instead of giving it to me, you gave it to them and told me it was good for my character. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city I'd been struggling to afford to live in while my family sat on millions of dollars with my name on it. "Do you know what the worst part is, Grandpa? It's not even the money. It's the fact that you watched me cry. You listened to me worry about my future, about whether I'd ever be able to afford to have children or buy a house or take a vacation. You comforted me when I was scared and stressed and anxious, all while knowing that you could fix everything with a phone call. Sarah, we thought. You thought you knew better than I did how my own life should go. You decided that struggle was good for me, that I needed to earn my place in the world, while you lived in luxury and my parents spent my money on charity galas and expensive wine. I turned back to face him, and I could see that the kindly grandfather persona was completely gone now. This was William Harrison, billionaire businessman, and he was starting to look angry. You're being dramatic, Sarah. We provided you with opportunities to build character, to learn the value of bullshit. The word came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. You provided my parents with opportunities to live off my money while I built character through poverty. There's a difference. What is it you want, Sarah? An apology? Access to your trust fund? Because that was always going to happen when you were ready. When I was ready. According to whom? You? The people who have been lying to me for 10 years. I walked back to his desk and leaned forward, putting my hands on the expensive wood.
Here's what I want, Grandpa.
I want my parents out of my house by tomorrow. I want every dollar they've stolen from me paid back within 30 days. And I want you to stay out of my life until I decide whether I can ever forgive you for this. His face hardened. Sarah, you're being unreasonable. Your parents don't have $1.8 million sitting around. They can't just. They can sell some of their investments. The investments they made with my money. Or they can take out loans. Or they can ask their billionaire father-in-law for help. But they cannot continue to live in my house and spend my money while I pretend this is all okay. And if they can't pay it back? I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Then I'll file criminal charges for theft and fraud. David Sterling assures me I have an excellent case. My grandfather stood up, and for the first time in my life, he looked intimidating. This was the man who had built a financial empire, who had probably crushed competitors and made enemies and won battles I couldn't even imagine. Sarah, I think you're forgetting something important. What's that? Everything you think you own, everything you think you're entitled to, it all came from me. I could have left you nothing. I could have put conditions on the trust that would have kept you from accessing any of it until you were 50. I gave you a gift, and now you're threatening to destroy your family over it. A gift. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. A gift would have been honesty. A gift would have been letting me make my own choices about my life instead of manipulating me into living the life you thought I should live. I picked up my purse and headed for the door. Sarah, wait. I turned back to him. I'm hosting a birthday party for you this weekend. A real celebration, with the whole family. We can announce your decision to join the family business, introduce you to the social circle you'll be part of now that you're accepting your inheritance. It could be a new beginning for all of us. I stared at him for a long moment. Are you serious right now? It would be a chance for us to move past this unpleasantness, to focus on the future. The unpleasantness? I could feel my voice rising. You mean the decade of lies and theft and manipulation? That unpleasantness. Sarah, please. Think about your family. I am thinking about my family. I'm thinking about how they stole from me and lied to me and used my suffering as some kind of moral victory story. And you know what I've decided? I don't want a party. I don't want a celebration. What I want is justice. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, but I turned back one more time. Oh, and Grandpa? When people ask you about your proudly independent granddaughter, you might want to start thinking of a new story. Because this one doesn't have the ending you thought it did. As I waited for the elevator, I could feel him watching me through his office window. The kind, gentle grandfather I had loved for 28 years was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. But then again, maybe I had never known him at all. Maybe none of them had ever been who I thought they were. The elevator doors closed, and I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not yet, but something sharper, more focused. They wanted to play games with my life? They wanted to manipulate my reality and call it love?
Fine.
But they were about to learn that the granddaughter they had underestimated for so many years had learned some things during her decade of struggle that money couldn't buy. And I was about to teach them exactly what those lessons were worth. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes Chicago feel like the most beautiful city in the world. Under normal circumstances, I would have spent my birthday doing something simple, maybe brunch with friends, a movie, a walk along the lake. Instead, I was preparing for what I knew would be the most important confrontation of my life. My grandfather had called 3 times since our meeting at his office, leaving increasingly tense voicemails about the birthday party he was planning. The last message had been more directive than request. "Sarah, the party is at 7 p.m. at the Drake Hotel. The Walton Room is reserved. Your family will be there, and so should you." The Drake Hotel. Of course. Only one of the most exclusive venues in Chicago, the kind of place where birthday parties cost more than most people's annual salaries. I had spent the week moving into my Lincoln Park house, my house, and every room I entered revealed new evidence of how my parents had been living. Custom artwork, expensive furniture, a wine cellar stocked with bottles that cost hundreds of dollars each. All paid for with money that should have been mine. They had left without a fight, probably at my grandfather's insistence, but not before I found a handwritten note from my mother on the kitchen counter. "Sarah, please remember that everything we did was out of love. We hope someday you'll understand." Love. They called lying to me for 10 years love. They called stealing nearly $2 million from me love. But now, as I stood in the bedroom of my own house, a room that had been decorated specifically for me, down to books on the nightstand that reflected my interests and clothes in the closet that were exactly my size, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. This hadn't been about teaching me character or independence. This had been about control. About making sure that when I finally learned the truth, I would be so grateful, so overwhelmed, that I would never question how they had orchestrated my entire life. They had been planning this revelation all along. The birthday party wasn't a celebration. It was a stage for my surrender. If you've ever realized that people you trusted were manipulating you in ways that were more sophisticated and long-term than you could have imagined, you know that sickening feeling of discovering that you've been living inside someone else's plan for your life. That's what hit me as I got dressed that evening. I chose my outfit carefully. A black dress I'd bought with my first paycheck from the marketing firm, paired with the pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. I wanted to look like the woman I had become through struggle, not the grateful heiress they expected me to transform into. The Drake Hotel was everything I'd expected: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, the kind of understated elegance that whispered serious money in every detail. The Walton Room was on the mezzanine level, and I could hear the sounds of conversation and laughter as I approached. I paused outside the door, taking a deep breath. Whatever happened in the next hour, my relationship with my family would never be the same. But then again, maybe it had never been what I thought it was in the first place. When I walked into the room, conversation stopped. There were maybe 30 people there, faces I recognized from my mother's Facebook photos, people who clearly moved in the same wealthy social circles as my family. They were all looking at me with expressions of curiosity and expectation, like I was about to perform in some kind of show. "Sarah?" My grandfather appeared at my side immediately, taking my arm in that possessive way that suddenly felt more controlling than affectionate. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my granddaughter, Sarah Chin." The crowd turned toward us, and I realized this wasn't just a birthday party. This was a coming-out event, a formal introduction of the Harrison family heiress to Chicago society. "Sarah has been making her own way in the world for the past several years," my grandfather continued, his voice carrying across the room, "learning the value of hard work and independence. But tonight, we're celebrating her decision to join the family business and take her rightful place in our company." There was polite applause, and several people approached to introduce themselves: business associates, family friends, people whose names I recognized from the social pages of Chicago magazines. They all spoke to me with the kind of respectful interest reserved for young people who have just inherited significant money. But I wasn't listening to them. I was watching my parents, who were standing near the bar, both of them watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. My mother looked nervous, almost frightened. My father looked resigned, like he was waiting for something terrible to happen. They knew. They both knew that this party, this whole elaborate performance, was about to go very differently than my grandfather had planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," my grandfather said, tapping his champagne glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. "If I could have your attention for a moment." The room quieted, and everyone turned toward us. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on me, waiting for whatever announcement was coming. As many of you know, my granddaughter Sarah has been living independently for the past several years, building her character through honest work and personal struggle. It's been a source of tremendous pride for Linda and Robert and me, watching her grow into such a strong, capable woman. There were murmurs of approval around the room. These people, my grandfather's friends and business associates, had clearly heard the story before. I was the Harrison family's example of proper child-rearing, the granddaughter who had chosen character over comfort. But tonight, on her birthday, we're celebrating a new chapter in Sarah's life. She's decided to embrace her heritage and join Harrison Financial Group as a senior associate, with a path toward partnership and eventual leadership of the company. More applause. Someone near the back called out, "Congratulations, Sarah." My grandfather turned to me with that familiar, loving smile, the same expression I'd seen on his face when he taught me to play chess, when he comforted me after my grandmother died, when he listened to me worry about my finances without ever mentioning that he could solve all my problems with a single phone call. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm and grandfatherly, "before we make this official, I wanted to ask you something in front of all our friends and family." He paused, and I could feel the entire room holding its breath. "Is the house I bought for you comfortable?" The question hit the room like a physical force. I heard my mother make a small, sharp sound of panic. Several people near us looked confused. They clearly hadn't known about the house, about any of the properties, about the extent of what my grandfather had been doing behind the scenes. But I knew this was the moment. This was the carefully orchestrated revelation, the dramatic unveiling of his generosity, designed to overwhelm me with gratitude and cement my loyalty in front of witnesses. He was expecting me to burst into tears of joy, to thank him publicly for his incredible kindness, to demonstrate to everyone in that room how grateful the struggling granddaughter was for her family's love and support. Instead, I looked at him with steady, clear eyes and said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, "What house?" The silence that followed was deafening. My grandfather's smile faltered slightly, but he pressed on, clearly thinking I was just confused or overwhelmed. "The house in Lincoln Park, sweetheart. The one I've been preparing for you. I wanted to surprise you with it tonight, to let everyone know about the home you'll have as you start this new chapter in your life." "I don't know anything about a house in Lincoln Park," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Are you talking about the house where my parents have been living for the past 3 years? The house they've been using while I lived in a studio apartment with a broken heater?" The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and electric. People started looking at each other. Whispers began, and I could see confusion and surprise on faces throughout the crowd. My grandfather's face went white. This wasn't going according to a script. "Sarah, I think there's been some confusion." "Has there been?" I turned slightly, addressing the room as much as him. "Because I'm confused too. I'm confused about how my parents could be living in a house that was supposedly purchased for me without me knowing about it. I'm confused about how they could be collecting rental income from properties that were supposedly mine while I was working 2 jobs to pay rent." The whispers were getting louder. Several people were staring at my parents, who looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. My grandfather tried to regain control. "Sarah, this isn't the time or place." "Isn't it?" I asked, and my voice was getting stronger, more commanding. "Isn't this exactly the time and place? You wanted to make a public announcement about my grateful acceptance of the family fortune. You wanted everyone here to see how the struggling granddaughter finally came home to embrace her inheritance." I took a step closer to him, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my grandfather's eyes. "But here's what I want to know, Grandpa. In front of all these people who have apparently been hearing about your proudly independent granddaughter for years, what have you been using the money to do?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Around the room, I could see people putting pieces together. The confused whispers were getting more pointed, more urgent. My grandfather looked at my parents, then back at me, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Sarah, I think we should discuss this privately.
No.
My voice was firm, final. We've had enough private discussions. We've had 10 years of private discussions where you all decided what was best for my life without bothering to include me in the conversation. I turned to address the room directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you coming to celebrate my birthday. But I think you should know that everything you've been told about the Harrison family's approach to raising independent children is a lie. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, my mother was crying, and my grandfather was staring at me with an expression of pure fury. I didn't choose independence over inheritance. I continued, my voice cutting through the noise. I was lied to about the inheritance existing. While I was struggling to pay student loans and eating ramen for dinner, my parents were living in luxury funded by money that legally belonged to me. Sarah, stop, my grandfather said, his voice low and dangerous. The trust fund that was established for me when I turned 18? I found out about it 6 days ago. The properties that were purchased for me? My parents have been living in them and collecting rental income from them for years. I looked around the room at all the shocked faces, people who had clearly bought into the family mythology of the hardworking, independent Harrison granddaughter. So yes, I'm joining the family business. But not as the grateful heiress who finally came home. I'm joining as someone who knows exactly what this family is capable of, and I'm going to make sure it never happens to anyone else. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, people started moving toward the exit. Business associates and family friends were filing out, their conversations hushed but clearly focused on what they had just witnessed. My grandfather grabbed my arm, harder than he ever had before. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he hissed. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "I've told the truth. For the first time in 10 years, someone in this family has told the truth. You've destroyed us. Our reputation. Our business relationships.
No, Grandpa.
You destroyed us. The moment you decided that lying to me was more important than loving me." I pulled my arm free and walked toward the door, but I stopped and turned back one more time. "Oh, and about that job offer? I'll be in touch with David Sterling about taking a more active role in Harrison Financial Group. As a major beneficiary of the family trusts, I believe I'm entitled to a seat on the board of directors." I left my grandfather standing in the middle of his ruined party, surrounded by the wreckage of the perfect family image he had spent decades constructing. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I could finally breathe. The morning after what the Chicago Tribune would later call the Harrison Hotel incident dawned gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I woke up in my Lincoln Park house, my house, to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and an email inbox that was exploding with notifications. The story had already hit the local social media pages. "Billionaire family drama explodes at Drake Hotel," read one headline. "Harrison Financial Group heiress exposes family lies," read another. Someone at the party had apparently been recording because there were video clips of my confrontation with my grandfather circulating on Facebook and Twitter. But it was the text message from my mother that made my hands shake as I read it. "Sarah, you have destroyed our family. Your father is having chest pains, and I've had to call Dr. Martinez. I hope you're happy with what your selfishness has accomplished. We raised you better than this." Selfishness. After everything they had done, the lying, the stealing, the manipulation, she was calling me selfish. If you've ever been in a situation where standing up for yourself was treated as betrayal by the people who hurt you, you know that sick, twisted feeling where their guilt-tripping almost works. For a moment, sitting in the kitchen of my beautiful house, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Then I remembered the broken heater in my old apartment, and the feeling passed. My phone rang. David Sterling, my lawyer. "Sarah, we need to talk. Can you come in this morning?" "Is it about the party last night?" "It's about the consequences of the party last night. Your grandfather called me at 6 a.m. He's not happy." An hour later, I was sitting in David Sterling's conference room again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. He looked tired and stressed, like he'd been fielding phone calls all morning. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. Your grandfather is threatening to contest the trust fund. On what grounds? Mental instability. He's claiming that your behavior last night demonstrates that you're not competent to manage significant financial assets. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. So now I'm mentally unstable because I told the truth about what my family did to me? He's also threatening to freeze all the accounts pending a full audit of your competency. It could tie everything up in court for years. Can he do that? David was quiet for a long moment. Technically, yes. As the trustee, he has broad discretionary powers until you reach age 30. And if he can convince a judge that you've demonstrated poor judgment. Poor judgment. I could feel my temper flaring again. David, they stole nearly $2 million from me. They lied to me for 10 years. They were using my money to fund their entire lifestyle while I was living paycheck to paycheck. How is exposing that poor judgment? Because you did it publicly, in a way that damaged the family's reputation and potentially their business interests. A judge might see that as vindictive rather than justice-seeking. I stared at him. Are you serious right now? They commit fraud, and I'm the problem because I didn't handle their crimes quietly enough. Sarah, I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's the reality of how these cases get handled when there's this much money involved. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in one of those buildings, my grandfather was probably in meetings with his own lawyers, figuring out how to spin this situation to his advantage. What are my options? We can fight it, but it will be expensive, time-consuming, and very public. The media attention alone could be devastating for everyone involved. Or you could negotiate. Your grandfather wants to meet. He's proposing a settlement. What kind of settlement? David pulled out another folder. Full access to your trust fund, with no restrictions. Immediate transfer of all properties to your name. And, he paused. A public apology from your parents and repayment of the money they took. It sounded too good to be true. What's the catch? You agree to join Harrison Financial Group as planned. You sign a non-disclosure agreement about the family's financial arrangements, and you participate in a public reconciliation. Essentially, you let them save face while you get what you're legally entitled to. So, I get my money, but I have to pretend that everything's fine? I have to help them maintain the lie. Sarah, it's not ideal, but...
No.
I turned back to face him. Absolutely not. I'm not going to be complicit in covering up what they did to me. Then you need to be prepared for a very long, very ugly legal battle. How long are we talking? 2 to 3 years minimum. Maybe longer. I thought about that. 2 to 3 more years of my life consumed by this family's manipulation, even if it was through the court system instead of direct lies. David, let me ask you something. In all your experience with trust fund disputes, how often do the trustees actually win when they're clearly in the wrong? He was quiet for a moment. Not often. But they don't have to win, Sarah. They just have to make the process so costly and painful that you give up. That's when I realized something important. My grandfather wasn't just trying to control me, he was trying to teach me a lesson. The same way he taught me lessons about character and independence by letting me struggle financially, he was now trying to teach me a lesson about consequences by making my life hell through the legal system. David, I need you to do something for me.
What?
I need you to prepare for the legal battle. File whatever paperwork we need to file. Prepare whatever arguments we need to prepare. Make it clear that I'm not backing down. Sarah, are you sure? But I also need you to do something else. I need you to investigate Harrison Financial Group's business practices. All of them. Going back at least 10 years. David's expression changed. Sarah, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that a man who would lie to his granddaughter for a decade and steal from her trust fund might not be completely honest in his business dealings either. That's a very serious accusation. It's a very serious situation. My grandfather is threatening to tie up my money in court for years because I told the truth about what my family did to me. He's using the legal system as a weapon, just like he used my trust fund as a weapon. I sat back down across from David. Here's what I think. I think my grandfather has been operating under the assumption that he's untouchable because no one in his family would ever dare to challenge him. I think he's made decisions about other people's money, clients' money, with the same casual disregard for ethics that he showed with mine. Sarah, if you're wrong about this. If I'm wrong, then we lose a legal battle that we were probably going to lose anyway. But if I'm right, I smiled, and this time it was a genuinely happy expression. If I'm right, then my grandfather is about to learn that the granddaughter he underestimated for so many years has picked up a few skills during her decade of independence. Over the next week, David Sterling hired a team of investigators to look into Harrison Financial Group's business practices. What they found was even worse than I had hoped. For the past 15 years, my grandfather had been using client funds for personal investments, not illegal exactly, but a serious breach of fiduciary duty. He'd been taking bigger risks with other people's money than his clients had authorized, then keeping the profits when the investments paid off. But the really damaging information came from former employees. 3 different people who had worked for Harrison Financial Group over the past decade were willing to testify that they had witnessed document alteration, client information being misrepresented, and investment strategies being implemented without proper client consent. It wasn't enough for criminal charges, but it was more than enough to destroy his reputation and potentially cost him his business license. Sarah, David said, spreading the investigation results across his conference table, this is nuclear. If this information goes public, your grandfather's career is over. Good. You understand that this will destroy him, right? Not just financially, but personally. His reputation, his legacy, everything he's built over 47 years. You mean everything he built by lying to people and manipulating their money without their consent? Kind of like what he did to me, but on a larger scale? David was quiet for a long moment. What do you want to do with this information? I want to meet with my grandfather. But this time, I want him to come to me. Sarah. Set up the meeting, David. Tell him I'm ready to discuss his settlement offer. But tell him the meeting is at my house, not his office. And tell him to come alone. 3 days later, my grandfather's car pulled into the driveway of my Lincoln Park house. Not the old Honda Civic I'd seen him drive for years, but a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than I used to make in 2 years. I watched him from the living room window as he sat in his car for several minutes before getting out. He looked older than he had at the hotel, more tired. The public humiliation of the party, combined with the stress of the legal threats, was clearly taking its toll. When he knocked on the door, I took my time answering it. Hello, Grandpa. Sarah. He looked around the house, his granddaughter's house that he'd bought and his daughter had been living in. This is a beautiful home. Yes, it is. It's a shame I didn't get to enjoy it for the first 3 years I owned it. We sat in the living room, and for the first time since this all began, he looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. Sarah, I want you to know that everything I did was out of love for you. I know you believe that. But love doesn't give you the right to steal from someone. Love doesn't give you the right to lie about their entire financial situation for a decade. I never stole from you. Grandpa, stop.
Please.
We're past the point where you can keep lying to me and expect me to believe it. I pulled out the folder of investigation results and set it on the coffee table between us. David Sterling's investigators have been very busy this week. His face went white as he saw the Harrison Financial Group letterhead on the documents. Sarah, what have you done? I've learned some very interesting things about your business practices. About how you handle other people's money when you think they're not paying attention. He started to reach for the folder, but I pulled it back. Did you really think I was going to let you threaten me with legal action? Did you think I was going to let you tie up my money in court for years because I had the audacity to tell the truth about what you did to me? Sarah, you don't understand the implications. I understand them perfectly. You have 47 years worth of business relationships, client trust, and professional reputation that could all disappear if the wrong information became public. I leaned back in my chair, feeling more in control of this conversation than I had ever felt in any interaction with my family. So here's my settlement offer, Grandpa. Full and immediate access to all my funds. Complete transfer of all properties to my name. public repayment of every dollar my parents stole from me, and a public apology, not one of those carefully worded non-apology apologies, but a real acknowledgement of what you all did to me. Sarah, I can't. And in exchange, this information stays between us. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the folder like it was a bomb that might go off at any second. You're blackmailing me. I'm negotiating. The same way you were negotiating when you threatened to tie up my money in court for years. This could destroy everything I've worked for. Yes, it could. The same way your lies destroyed 10 years of my life. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden that should have been mine to enjoy all these years. You know what the difference is between us, Grandpa? When you controlled my life, you told yourself it was for my own good. When I control yours, I'm honest about the fact that it's revenge. Sarah, please. Think about your family. Think about your parents. I am thinking about them. I'm thinking about how they spent years living off money that belonged to me while watching me struggle. I'm thinking about how they used my financial stress as some kind of moral victory story. I turned back to face him. You have 24 hours to accept my settlement offer. After that, David Sterling files everything with the state licensing board, and we let the chips fall where they may. He stood up slowly, looking older and more defeated than I had ever seen him. You've changed, Sarah. Yes, I have. 10 years of unnecessary struggle will do that to a person. This isn't who you are. Maybe not, but it's who you taught me to be. He walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. If you do this, there's no going back. Our relationship, our family, it will never be the same. Grandpa, I said gently, our relationship was never what I thought it was. It was based on lies from the very beginning. After he left, I sat in my beautiful house and waited. I didn't feel triumphant or satisfied. I just felt tired and sad and strangely empty. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in 10 years, completely in control of my own life. 22 hours later, David Sterling called. Sarah, your grandfather has accepted all your terms. The public apology was scheduled for the following Friday at the Chicago Cultural Center, a venue that my grandfather's PR team had chosen for its prestige and neutral atmosphere. They wanted it to feel official and dignified, not like the desperate damage control it actually was. I spent the week leading up to it in a strange state of anticipation mixed with exhaustion. Getting everything I demanded should have felt like victory, but mostly it felt like the end of something that had been breaking inside me for years. The house felt different now that it was truly mine, not just legally, but emotionally. I walked through rooms that my parents had lived in, touching furniture they had chosen with my money, and tried to figure out how to make it feel like home instead of like a crime scene. If you've ever gotten everything you thought you wanted through a process that destroyed relationships you thought mattered to you, you know it's not the clean satisfaction you imagine it will be. It's messier, sadder, more complicated than simple justice. But it was also necessary. The morning of the apology, I woke up to a text message from my mother. Sarah, I hope you know that we love you, no matter how this ends. I stared at that message for a long time.
Love.
They kept using that word, as if it justified everything they had done, as if saying it made the lies and theft somehow okay. Maybe they did love me, in their way. But their love had been conditional on me living the life they thought I should live, being grateful for struggles they had chosen for me, accepting their vision of who I was supposed to be. That wasn't love. That was ownership. The cultural center was beautiful that morning, sunlight streaming through the tall windows and casting patterns on the marble floors. There were about 50 people there, mostly media, some business associates, a few family friends who had apparently been convinced to show up for moral support. I arrived exactly on time, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to my disastrous birthday party the week before. I wanted to look like the woman who had stood up for herself, not like someone who was backing down or making compromises. My family was already there, sitting in the front row looking like they were attending a funeral. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and my father looked like he hadn't slept in days. My grandfather sat between them, wearing his most formal suit and the expression of a man who was about to deliver his own eulogy. The proceedings began with a statement from David Sterling, explaining that the Harrison family was making a public statement to address recent misunderstandings and clarify the family's commitment to transparency and ethical financial management. Misunderstandings. Even now, they were trying to soften the language. Then it was my grandfather's turn. He walked to the podium slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the microphone. For a moment, he looked like the gentle grandfather I had loved for so many years, and I felt a stab of something that might have been regret. But then he began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today to address serious mistakes that have been made in the management of my granddaughter Sarah's trust fund and financial affairs. His voice was steady, professional, but I could see the cost of every word on his face. 10 years ago, when Sarah turned 18, I established a trust fund for her education and future financial security. However, in my misguided attempt to teach her the value of hard work and independence, I made the decision not to inform her of this trust's existence. There were murmurs from the audience. This was clearly news to most of the people there. This decision was wrong. Sarah had the right to know about her financial resources and to make her own choices about how to use them. By keeping this information from her, I denied her the autonomy and respect she deserved as an adult. He paused, taking a breath that seemed to cost him tremendous effort. Furthermore, over the past 3 years, properties purchased through Sarah's trust fund were used by other family members without proper compensation or Sarah's knowledge. This constituted a serious breach of fiduciary duty and was tantamount to theft from my granddaughter's estate. The room was completely silent now. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes and were just staring. Sarah spent 10 years of her adult life struggling financially while resources that belonged to her were being mismanaged and misappropriated by the very people she trusted to protect her interests. My mother made a small sound, half sob, half gasp, and covered her face with her hands. The total amount that was improperly used from Sarah's trust fund is $1.8 million, which will be repaid in full with interest within 30 days. He looked directly at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before, genuine remorse. Sarah, I owe you more than money. I owe you an apology for stealing 10 years of your life, for watching you struggle when I could have helped, for using your financial stress as some twisted form of character building. What I did to you was not love, it was control, and it was wrong. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, my grandfather continued. I also want to publicly acknowledge that Sarah's response to learning about this betrayal has been completely justified. Her anger, her demands for accountability, her refusal to accept our explanations, all of it has been appropriate and necessary.
I wasn't expecting that.
I had expected the apology, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but not the validation of my reaction to it. My granddaughter has shown more integrity in the past 2 weeks than I have shown in 10 years. She has demanded truth when we offered excuses, justice when we offered justifications. He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice was quieter, more personal. Sarah, I hope that someday you might be able to forgive me. Not because I deserve it, but because I love you, and I'm proud of the woman you've become, not despite the struggles we put you through, but despite the lies we told you about them. Then, it was my parents' turn. My mother approached the podium like she was walking to her own execution, but when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. I want to apologize to my daughter for being a willing participant in this deception. We told ourselves we were protecting Sarah, that we were teaching her important lessons about self-reliance. The truth is, we were protecting ourselves from difficult conversations, from Sarah's potential anger, from having to confront our own financial dependence on my father. She looked directly at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah, you asked me once why we couldn't just help you when you were struggling. The answer is that helping you would have required us to be honest with you, and we weren't brave enough to do that. We chose our own comfort over your well-being, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. My father's statement was shorter, but no less painful to watch. Sarah, I failed you as a father. I let my own financial insecurity and pride prevent me from being honest with you about our family situation. I watched you work multiple jobs and stress about money while living in comfort that was paid for with resources that belonged to you. There is no excuse for that, and I don't expect your forgiveness. When it was over, when all the apologies had been made and all the admissions of guilt had been recorded for posterity, I found myself sitting in my car in the parking lot, completely numb. It had been everything I demanded and more. They had publicly acknowledged every aspect of their betrayal, accepted full responsibility for their actions, and committed to making financial restitution. I had won. So, why did I feel so empty? That evening, I sat in my beautiful house, my house, and tried to figure out what came next. I had $3.7 million in accessible funds, plus properties worth over $8 million, plus the promise of $1.8 million in restitution from my parents. I was, by any reasonable measure, set for life. But I was also completely alone. My phone had been ringing all day, reporters wanting follow-up interviews, lawyers wanting to discuss investment strategies, distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly interested in reconnecting. But not a single call from the three people who had been the center of my life for 28 years. I walked through the house room by room, looking at all the beautiful things that had been chosen for me by people who thought they knew what I wanted better than I did. The books on the shelves were all titles I would enjoy, but I had never gotten to discover them for myself. The clothes in the closet were all in my size and style, but I had never gotten to choose them. Even the art on the walls reflected my taste perfectly, but it felt more like living in a museum dedicated to me than living in my own home. At midnight, I made a decision. I called David Sterling's emergency number. Sarah? Is everything okay? David, I need you to do something for me. I need you to set up a foundation. A foundation? Sarah, it's midnight. I want to establish a foundation that provides emergency financial assistance to young adults who are being manipulated or controlled through money. College students whose parents are threatening to cut off tuition unless they choose certain majors. Young people whose families are using financial dependence to control their life choices. People who are trapped in situations like I was. There was silence on the other end of the line. Sarah, that's a beautiful idea. But maybe we should discuss this when you've had more time to process everything that's happened. No, David. I want to do this now. I want to do it with the $1.8 million my parents are paying back to me. I don't want their money. I want to use their money to make sure other people don't go through what I went through. Are you sure about this? I looked around my perfect house at all the perfect things that had been chosen for my perfect life, and I realized something important. I didn't want perfect. I wanted real. I wanted to build something with my life that was mine, not something that had been planned and orchestrated and manipulated by other people who thought they knew what was best for me. I'm sure, David. More sure than I've been about anything in 10 years. Okay, we'll start the paperwork on Monday. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my house and felt something I hadn't felt since this whole ordeal began. Peace. Not happiness, not yet. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep.
But peace.
The calm that comes from knowing you're finally living your own life, making your own choices, being your own person. My family had stolen 10 years from me, but they had also, inadvertently, given me something valuable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive their manipulation, smart enough to uncover their lies, and brave enough to demand justice even when it cost me everything I thought I wanted. I was Sarah Chun, and for the first time in my adult life, I belonged to myself. That was worth more than all the money in the world. 6 months later, I was standing in the offices of the Chun Foundation for Financial Independence, watching our first group of grant recipients receive their awards. 23 young people, ages 18 to 25, each one trapped in a situation where family members were using money as a weapon of control. There was Marcus, whose parents had threatened to cut off his college tuition unless he switched from art to business. There was Elena, whose family was withholding her inheritance unless she married the man they had chosen for her. There was David, whose father was using his trust fund to force him to work in the family business instead of pursuing his dream of becoming a teacher. Each of their stories was different, but they all had the same theme. Families who believed that love gave them the right to control someone else's life through financial manipulation. If you've ever wondered what happens after the revenge story ends, After you get everything you thought you wanted, here's what I learned. Justice doesn't heal you. It doesn't make you whole again. But it can give you the power to make sure other people don't have to go through what you went through. The foundation had started with the $1.8 million my parents had paid back to me, but it was growing rapidly. Other people who had experienced similar situations were donating money, time, and expertise. We had lawyers who provided free legal advice, therapists who specialized in family financial abuse, and financial advisors who helped our grant recipients learn how to manage their newfound independence. Sarah, my assistant, Jennifer, knocked on my office door. There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. Send her in. The woman who walked into my office was about 45, well-dressed but nervous, and there was something familiar about her that I couldn't quite place. Ms. Chen? My name is Patricia Holbrook. I saw your story on the news a few months ago, and I've been trying to work up the courage to come see you. Please sit down. How can I help you? She settled into the chair across from my desk, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. Ms. Chen, I work for Harrison Financial Group. I felt my stomach drop. I see. I've worked there for 12 years and I know things about your grandfather's business practices, about other clients who have been taken advantage of. I leaned forward. What kind of things? There's a woman, Mrs. Catherine Morrison. She's 82 years old, and your grandfather has been managing her investments for 15 years. She has Alzheimer's now, and her daughter thinks everything is fine because the statements look good, but... Patricia pulled out a folder from her purse. He's been moving money around, making investments without her consent, taking bigger risks with her portfolio than she ever authorized. She's lost almost 40% of her retirement savings, but the statements make it look like everything is normal. I stared at the documents she was showing me. It was exactly what David Sterling's investigators had found evidence of, but now there was a name, a face, a real person being hurt. There are others, Patricia continued. At least 6 clients that I know of, all elderly, all being managed by your grandfather personally. Their families trust him completely because of his reputation, but he's been doing to them what he did to you, just in a different way. I felt a familiar anger starting to build, but this time it wasn't personal. This time it was something bigger, cleaner. Patricia, why are you telling me this? Because after your press conference, I couldn't sleep at night. I kept thinking about what you said, about how justice doesn't just mean getting what's yours. It means making sure it doesn't happen to other people. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Your grandfather is still out there, Ms. Chen. Still managing other people's money. Still making decisions for people who trust him. The public apology didn't change anything about his business practices. It just made him more careful. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking. My legal settlement with my grandfather had included a non-disclosure agreement, but only about my personal family situation. It didn't prevent me from taking action about other clients being harmed. Patricia, would you be willing to testify about what you've seen? That's why I'm here. 2 weeks later, David Sterling and I were sitting across from investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission, laying out a case against Harrison Financial Group that went far beyond my personal family drama. The investigation took 8 months. During that time, my grandfather tried to call me 17 times. I didn't answer any of the calls, but I listened to the voicemails. They started angry. Sarah, you gave me your word that this was over. You're destroying everything I've worked for. Then pleading, sweetheart, please. Think about what this will do to the family. Think about your parents. Finally resigned. I suppose I deserve this. I taught you to fight for what's right, and now you're fighting against me. I'm proud of you, even if it kills me. That last message made me cry, but it didn't make me stop. The SEC investigation concluded that Harrison Financial Group had systematically violated fiduciary duty regulations with at least 12 clients over a period of 8 years. The financial losses to those clients totaled $4.2 million. My grandfather's business license was revoked, and he was ordered to pay full restitution to all affected clients. Harrison Financial Group was shut down permanently. He was 77 years old, and his life's work was gone. I felt terrible about it, and I felt completely at peace with it at the same time. The day the SEC announcement was made public, my mother called me for the first time since the press conference. Sarah, I hope you're happy. I'm not happy, Mom, but I'm not sorry either. Your grandfather is broken. Completely broken. He sits in his house all day, doesn't eat, barely speaks. The man who raised me is gone. The man who raised me was a lie, Mom. Everything about him was a lie. So this is it? This is your revenge? Destroying an old man who made mistakes, but who loved you. I was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window of my office at the city where I had struggled and grown and finally learned to fight for myself. Mom, this isn't about revenge anymore. This is about justice. There's a difference. I don't see one. I know you don't. That's part of the problem. After I hung up, I sat in my office and thought about the 23 young people we had helped in our first 6 months and the 47 more applications we had waiting for our next round of grants. I thought about Mrs. Catherine Morrison, who is now getting proper financial management and would be able to afford her Alzheimer's care because the money my grandfather had lost through risky investments was being restored to her account. I thought about Patricia Holbrook, who had left Harrison Financial Group and was now working as our foundation's client advocate, helping other people find the courage to speak up when they were being financially manipulated. And I thought about my grandfather, sitting alone in his house, probably wondering how the granddaughter he had tried so hard to control had ended up controlling his fate instead. The truth was, I did feel sorry for him. I felt sorry for all of them, my parents, my grandfather, even myself. We were a family that had been destroyed by lies and money, and the belief that love gave you the right to control other people's lives. But feeling sorry didn't mean I regretted what I had done. It just meant I understood the cost.
My phone rang.
Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. Sarah, there's a young woman here to see you. She says her parents are threatening to cut off her medical school funding unless she moves back home and lets them choose her residency program. I smiled. Not a happy smile, exactly, but a satisfied one. Send her in. This was my life now. Not the life my family had planned for me. Not the grateful heiress who joined the family business and lived happily ever after in their perfect house with their perfect money. This was better. This was real. This was mine. I was Sarah Chin, founder of the Chin Foundation for Financial Independence, and every day I woke up knowing that I was using my power that had been stolen from me and then reclaimed through my own fight to make sure other people could fight for themselves too. My grandfather had been right about one thing. Struggle does build character. But real character comes from choosing your own struggles, not having them chosen for you by people who claim to know what's best for your life. And real love doesn't need to control someone to keep them close. It trusts them to make their own choices and supports them when those choices get difficult. I never got that kind of love from my family, but I was learning to give it to myself and to the people who walked into my office every day looking for the courage to take control of their own lives. That was worth more than all the trust funds and properties and family money in the world. That was worth everything. Thank you for listening to my story. If you're somewhere in the world where family members are using money to control your life, where people who claim to love you are making decisions about your future without including you in them, I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not powerless. Real independence isn't about having enough money to survive on your own, though that helps. Real independence is about having the courage to live your own truth, even when it disappoints the people who think they know what's best for you. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from and if you've ever had to fight for control of your own life. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who refuse to let others write their stories for them. And remember, the people who truly love you will support your right to choose your own path, even when it's not the path they would choose for you. That's not betrayal. That's love.